Well, actually, D66, my political party, has made a start.
I know.
We consider access to the internet as a fundamental right, which has been both applauded and criticized, but it's a start. Your question.
I know.
Yes, hello. My name is Simone Disegni, and I'm a policy officer at Think Young. So, working on this event, I've had the time and the chance to read and to find out a little bit more about this campaign. And honestly, I found it both fascinating and controversial on some other side, because as you have been mentioning, the internet is probably the most open and democratic instrument we have had in the last centuries. But of course, it can be used for the most honorable causes as well as for the worst means. So my question, which would be perhaps addressed in particular to Mr. Dokir and Mr. Solomon, because I know you particularly work on freedom of expression from different perspectives. I mean, we are sitting in the temple of democracy here, of European democracy, so we all agree that freedom of expression is a basic human right as well as a basis of a democratic and healthy society. But on the other side, we know that in every legal system, I mean in the offline world, not about the internet, freedom of expression has had to be confined and limited in some ways, because it can, as every right, it can be used to hurt other people. So do you think it should be the same for internet? I mean, do you think that there should be a way to limit the freedom of expression on the internet in order to avoid some dangers of terrorists or other criminals spreading their hatred or their bad intentions? Or do you think it will be completely wrong? And if yes, to what extent should we imagine a control over the contents which are uploaded on the internet? Thank you.
Well, that's a complicated question to finish with, but one fact, it's very complicated to control content over the internet for lots of technical reasons. Some legal issues also will complicate the attempt of controlling. But in freedom of expression theory, it is often argued that the best remedy is not to suppress, to delete the harmful content. If you've got bad speech, what you need is better speech. So I think that if we're looking at the way to fight hate speech or bad speech, to put it that way, over the internet, the best thing to do is to identify this bad speech and to have, counter campaigns and bring more good speech, to put it in a very simple way. But attempts to control content is something complicated. Also because, as I've tried to say, depending upon which country you are in, the way freedom of expression is perceived, is conceived, is constructed may be very different, and different perceptions may not be reconciled. So the best thing to do is to promote good speech, good values, when you can identify and spot something really bad like hate speech.
I mean, I think it's a great frame, actually. There are certain things, I think for too long now there's been this kind of distinction between the so-called real world and the virtual world. And in a sense it's now the world, like it's all one. And so I sort of feel like we should be dealing with, even though there are practical kind of and technical issues at hand here, so I feel like we should be dealing with these issues in the same way as we have been dealing with them in the offline world. So for instance, child pornography, it's a crime, right? And it should be dealt with in the same way that you deal with crimes. So you deal with it through policing, through parenting and through education. And I think that you use the same kind of response in the online world. But there is these additional factors as well, the sort of the tech factors, and how do you actually identify and how do you incarcerate or whatever. But still, I don't want to see this as a blocking or a filtering issue. If there's something that is illegal, it should be dealt with as you would a crime in the offline world. Yeah.
I do agree that we live in one world, be it online or offline, it's one same world. But if you cannot identify the person who put some harmful content or it's like a defamatory statement, and on the web it's very often that you cannot identify that person. And on the other hand, being anonymous can be very useful to some people. So it's one real technical difficulty.
Yes.
And then coming back to child porn, which is something that to some extent is protected under the First Amendment, or was to some extent, not the sexual assault against children, of course, but the representation of pornography with children is to some extent protected under the First Amendment in the US. So it's not that easy, that reconciliation of values upon things that look very obvious to us, European, like hate speech or child porn. It's complicated from a legal point of view.
Yeah, I also wanted to follow up on this issue about, is the world one world in fact, or are there different things to consider in the digital environment? And I want to mention two things that have both briefly come up in this seminar. One is ACTA, or the fighting of production of and trade in counterfeit goods, genes, medicine, batteries, and how currently in the ACTA negotiations these are put in one world or in one batch with the digital environment, copyright infringements and international intellectual property rights. I would like to hear from you whether there's actually sufficient laws that can be applied to the entire spectrum, and whether the ACTA world is in fact one world, if you know what I mean, if the digital environment should be considered differently from the counterfeit goods, so solid goods. And the other issue that I think has recently sparked a lot of debate is that of WikiLeaks, which will probably continue to challenge notions of what is legal and possible within our current legal framework, and shows, I think, that the digital environment truly does allow for different vehicles in communicating, in sharing information and generating access to information. So with these two examples, I would like to ask whether it's actually sufficient to say that existing laws are enough, because to some extent I think in fighting crime or in fighting child pornography, absolutely, but possibly in other areas it's more difficult to work with laws that are 30 years old or 40 years old in a world that's where technologies are turning around in development by the day or the year.
Like they haven't evolved, or they have, like the sanctions framework, for instance, that we talked about earlier. It's being conceptualized in the context of a pre-online world. And so the role of new technology in empowering civil society was not conceived of, and therefore the law punishes as a result. So I'm not saying that laws don't need to evolve. I think what I'm saying is that we need to conceptually change the frame, and also to keep the best of the so-called real world and bring that into the virtual world. So, for instance, the human rights framework, I think, is something that we have developed in the offline world that needs to be firmly incorporated and form the bedrock, really, of our virtual world. And that's why I think that the charter idea, of which there is a new or a kind of evolved version, which is going to be released at the IGF in the next couple of days, is so important, because it does actually bring, the rights framework that we've been using in our offline world into our virtual world, and then hopefully it becomes part of the combined world.
Yeah.
Well, I do agree with the fact that it's one world, be it online or offline, so please don't shoot my avatar. But I just wanted to do a quick comment on the WikiLeaks case, because that's a very interesting case. Basically, we could consider that the job they are doing, putting more information at the availability of the public, is a very good thing, and is very possible because of the technicalities of the internet. One thing is, they were incautious. They were not experts at manipulating information. So they let out too many names, things that an expert journalist would not have put to the knowledge of the public. So I think this illustrates very well the state of the new media, or the state of the internet, or at least in its open version. It's something that we are still learning. And so the best thing I believe the European Union could do is go for media literacy and media education, help people learn about the new medias and how to use them.
Do you want to have another last thought?
Yes. Like three short thoughts. The first one is about law infringements on the net. And in Italy we have a way of saying, I don't know if it makes any sense in English, it's a tree falling makes more noise than a forest growing. And so if you want to, I don't know if it makes any sense in English for you, but I mean, the sense is that if there is something, if something bad happens on the net, it's on the front page tomorrow in every country newspaper.
Except in Wired.
Also in Wired. And there is also a bad perception of what's really going on the internet. For instance, in Italy, I always often am questioned about the fact that on Facebook they can open a group against Roberto Saviano, the writer, the famous Italian writer. And I answer usually that the problem is not that there is a group against Saviano on Facebook, but that in Italy there is still mafia. And so sometimes we have a bad perception of the reality. And a group on Facebook is something that you can deal with, you can fight, the real problem is to go and to fight Camorra. That's a bigger effort that we should make in Italy. The second thought is for Iran. I told you that my campaign started when I was moved by what was going on for the Iran election, and now nobody is talking about them. It's like that if they are not tweeting anymore. It's not correct. If you go on Twitter and you find the hashtag Iran election, you find like one Twitter every 2 minutes. They are trying to make us listen their voices, but we just turn our heads away from them, and I think it's a pity. It's the same. It's what Queen Rania said in Paris, that probably one of the paradox of the Iran election is that for a while it seemed that it was the most important fact in the world. Then Michael Jackson died. And in Twitter, everybody started tweeting about Michael Jackson. And I mean, that's what I was meaning when I said to you that it's up to us. If we want to tweet about the death of Michael Jackson or to help people to fight for democracy. And the third is about if the law are appropriate or not for the digital world. Actually, they are not. I just want to make an example. It's about copyright infringements. I think that in the digital times, my problem in the internet is not to be copied, is to be ignored. If someone wants to take my article on Wired and want to share it with his friends or friends in Facebook, I'm grateful to him or to her. And actually our law, especially in Italy, they come from 2 centuries ago. And they cannot give the permission to use my article. I think it's a pity, and it's also stupid. And so we are, in Wired in Italy, we are launching a new website October the 8th. It's a symbolic date because it's the date of the Nobel Prize. So we're launching a new website, so just in case we are ready, just to get the news. And it will be a website adopting Creative Commons, a Creative Commons license. I think it is very important if politicians, especially in Italy, I don't know at the European level, but in Italy they don't know what Creative Commons is. And I think it can be very important to make a bridge between corporations of music or movies or whatever, and new generation to explain what Creative Commons is, because it can be the solution for the copyrights in the digital times.